Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, thank you all for being with us today at this anniversary conference. Before starting our event, it is my pleasure to announce that our meeting is transmitted live via YouTube and social media. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, it gives me great pleasure to host together with Secretary General Thomas Garrett, the 20th anniversary conference of the Warsaw Declaration and of the Community of Democracies. It is with great honor that I welcome the Honorable Madeleine Albright, former Secretary of State, co-founder of the Community of Democracies at this significant meeting. It is a privilege to have you with us today, even under these extraordinary circumstances, as keynote speaker. I am particularly happy that our discussion earlier this year at the conference becomes reality today, as we reaffirm our special gratitude to your pioneering work in the founding of the Community of Democracies. We are looking forward for your meaningful insights. I also extend our warm welcome to the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Mrs. Michelle Bachelet, and to the EU Commissioner for Values and Transparency, Mrs. Vera Jourova, for joining our very important discussion today. I welcome and I'm very pleased that representatives from civil society and other partner organizations will also share their perspectives during this high-level event. At the moment when Romania took over the presidency of the Community of Democracies last September, we were envisaging a very different event for marking this anniversary. Unfortunately, the unprecedented challenges posed by the COVID pandemic have not only prevented us from reuniting in a plenary ministerial meeting in Bucharest, but at points have also put to the test the very concepts on which our societies and community are built. Thus, we have learned once again the lesson that multidimensional crises cannot be solved by one state alone, but only through international cooperation and solidarity. During this past month, Romania took a bid on multilateralism, on responsibility and empathy. It was the first country to host a common European reserve for emergency medical equipment, for distributing medical supplies to countries in our neighborhood and beyond. We have also offered bilateral support packages and medical staff to countries such as the Republic of Moldova, Italy, United States, and soon to Ukraine. 20 years ago, the 19 principles of the Warsaw Declaration brought together 106 governments at different stages on their democratic path, nevertheless animated by the same democratic ideal. These principles, expressing fundamental and universal values, have withstood the test of time. Back then, Romania was not yet a member of NATO or of the European Union, but was seeking to strengthen its democratic institutions and practices. Today, the status of an EU and NATO member state, along with the strategic partnership with the United States, represent the guiding pillars of our foreign policy. Romania is a solid democracy with a mature civil society under the scrutiny of a free and vibrant media. Respect for the rule of law, for human rights and fundamental freedoms are values that we share with many partners and friends around the world, and of course, many of them are with us today. Dear participants, ladies and gentlemen, the COVID crisis goes beyond the sanitary dimension. Some use the pandemic window to brand false authoritarian effectiveness. Other actors point to external enemies for internal difficulties or despise liberal values and are quick to call them obsolete. Fake news, disinformation, confusion that put to question the very values our community are more present than ever in our news feeds. And this context requires coordinated and decisive action. We must not stay cross-handed, otherwise there is no doubt that our common legacy as well as the well-being of our people could be affected. I believe we should use the momentum given by this celebration as an opportunity to focus on what we can do to prevent this sanitary crisis to become a crisis of democracy. Our democratic institutions provide us with the necessary means to combat such rhetoric and misleading narratives, while fully respecting the will of the people, promoting accurate data on the state of play, on the rights and duties of citizens during the pandemic, should also be at the center of our efforts. Dear friends, in September 2019, Romania undertook the presidency of the Community of Democracies for 2 years. Romania put forward an ambitious list of priorities for its mandate, and we intend to fulfill our promises, including that of organizing a full-fledged 2-day ministerial conference in Bucharest in 2021. As schools are still closed across the world, while other measures of social distancing are progressively relaxed, we realize that young people are bearing the brunt of the restrictive measures imposed by the pandemic. Thus, placing youth inclusion and empowerment as a priority high on our agenda is particularly timely, and I'm glad to inform you that with the precious support of the Secretariat, Romania will organize by the end of July a virtual youth forum, which was initially intended to be organized in the margins of the 10th ministerial meeting in Bucharest. As a platform for the participation of representatives of youth-led organizations and other youth stakeholders, the forum will aim at sharing good practices among world regions regarding youth political and civic participation. We also see that the constant effort by some foreign entities of blurring the boundaries between truth and lie to sow confusion and distrust in democratically elected governments seems to have become, unfortunately, a feature of our times. That is why the presidency of the Romanian presidency of the Community of Democracy will continue the series of events on countering malign foreign interference in democracies, launched a year ago with the support of the United States Agency for International Development. We intend to organize a major conference dedicated to the same topic in the near future. Dear friends, at the end of this introductory intervention, I want to reaffirm my belief that democracy is not always a triumphal march, but a marathon of adaptability, of resiliency, and a commitment to working together, a marathon which we need to win together. Over the past 20 years, the Community of Democracies has made considerable progress to fulfill its mandate. It is thus the time to weigh up these achievements, but also ponder on how the community accommodates today's realities and expectations. Thus, we should use the anniversary of the Community of Democracies as a decisive moment to reconfirm our commitment to our shared values, to take action, to recognize our strength, and work together to mend our weaknesses. As the Warsaw Declaration will continue to be a cornerstone on our path, I wish the Community of Democracies many years to come and every success in the promotion and support of democracy worldwide. I thank you all for your attention, and I'm looking forward to your valuable insights. I would like now to invite the Secretary General of the Community of Democracies, Mr. Thomas Garrett, and I use this opportunity to address our gratitude to him for the dedicated work in the service of our community, and also for the constant support offered to the Romanian presidency of the Community of Democracies. So, Thomas, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Foreign Minister Aurescu. Excellencies, distinguished guests from around the world, I want to welcome you to this global gathering for the 20th anniversary celebration of the Warsaw Declaration. Foreign Minister Aurescu, let me thank you for the leadership given by Romania in its current presidency of the Community of Democracies. Your determination to honor and to promote the 19 principles of the Warsaw Declaration in this time of challenge serves as an inspiration to all of the member states. And I also want to offer my appreciation to Poland, which for 2 decades and through successive governments has been a very generous host and support of the Community of Democracies. And so thank you, Foreign Minister Czaputowicz. To both Romania and Poland, I want to thank you for sponsoring the series of new posters that we saw at the beginning of this event. The new posters freshly illustrate, for the next 20 years, the 19 principles of the Warsaw Declaration. I also want to especially thank Secretary Madeleine Albright, who will soon speak to us about both the promise of this organization and the work still to be done for democracies seeking to act in solidarity on human rights and fundamental freedoms. At the Community of Democracies, we are privileged to still receive guidance from Secretary Albright, 20 years after she and the late Foreign Minister, Bronislaw Geremek, joined others to bring about the first gathering of this body in Warsaw. And as we honor the anniversary of the Warsaw Declaration, I'm glad that we're joined today by Ambassador Maria Leisner, who served as Secretary General of the Community of Democracies from 2012 to 2017. Let me just say thank you, Ambassador Leisner, for your contributions to the Community of Democracies, and I'm looking forward to hearing your remarks. And so it was 20 years ago that nations from every corner of the world came to Poland for a gathering, which they called Towards a Community of Democracies. Those countries represented the diversity that exists in democracy, and they were proof that every country was at a different place on its path to democracy. The Community of Democracies' new logo, which you can see behind me, with its various shades of blue, continues to represent that diversity and democracy. But even then, while acknowledging diversity, those gathered knew that there were certain principles, certain universal values of human rights that were necessary for a system to call itself a democracy. And so 106 countries, which met in 2000, adopted the Warsaw Declaration on Democracy. Far from being a mere political statement, the Warsaw Declaration is a platform of international engagement for the defense and promotion of one's civil and political rights. In preparation for that 2000 meeting, the Warsaw Declaration was drafted by diplomats from several countries. One of the key drafters of the original declaration, Morten Halprin, is with us today. I can see him with us from Washington, D.C. And I want to say to Morten, thank you, and thank your colleagues for a great job done then, which produced a document that not only recalled the existing commitments democratic governments have made to that point, but it also gave us and indicated new standards necessary to help states enter and remain on the path of democracy. Very briefly, let me just say, what were some of those commitments and standards? The Warsaw Declaration of the right of every person to equal protection of the law, in principle number 3. Another important principle speaks to the right of every person to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. Warsaw Declaration principle number 9 enshrines the freedom of peaceful assembly and association. And in the Warsaw Declaration, language that is as fresh now as it was in 2000, we find the Declaration gives voice to legitimate aspirations of people all over this world for such things as free and fair elections, freedom of opinion and expression, just to name a few of the commitments outlined in the Declaration. The Warsaw Declaration is still a standard by which established governments can remain on the road to democracy, and the Declaration also serves as a roadmap for countries that are early on their democratic path. Because for both established democracies and young democracies, the challenges are similar, as no democracy moves only from triumph to triumph, but all of them face changing threats and new opportunities. And so to my friends and supporters of democracy and human rights that are with us today, let me just note that today's global challenge posed by the COVID-19 pandemic stresses the importance of support and collaboration between democracies. The next few months and years are going to show if this current crisis enabled us all to grasp the fact that progress through dialogue and cooperation is really the only way towards a more peaceful and safer world. We know that democratic systems of government, which are built on respect for human rights, have the best foundation to overcome crisis. To those who have said that democracy is ill-equipped to address this pandemic, the Community of Democracies, in a united voice, responds firmly that the exact opposite is true. The values of the Warsaw Declaration provide the ultimate immune system for democracies today. In his invitation to that very first meeting back in the year 2000, Foreign Minister Garrett said, regardless of the problems inseparably associated with democracy, it is a system which best fulfills the aspiration of individuals, societies, and entire peoples, and that most fully satisfies their needs of development, empowerment, and creativity. His words are as relevant today as they were in the year 2000, and so too are the principles of the Warsaw Declaration. Here in the Permanent Secretariat of the Committee of Democracies in Warsaw, we have a very large photograph hanging in the library of the family photo from the 10th anniversary of the Community of Democracies. That meeting was held in the surroundings of the Opera House in Krakow.
Okay, all right, fine.
Our meeting now, 10 years later, may be a little bit less ornate, but our digital gathering is no less important now than it was in 2000 or in 2010. The reaffirmation of the state's adherence to the Warsaw Declaration's principles has never been more needed than today, not only because of this global health crisis, but also in the face of the democratic backsliding which we've seen challenge too many countries over the last decade. So that original theme under which countries gathered in 2000, towards a community of democracies, it reminds us all that democracy is never finally achieved, but it's always sought. Democracy can be supported, it can be adhered to when democracies agree to work to support one another, to encourage one another, and share best practices and hard lessons learned, all within that framework, very valuable framework of the Warsaw Declaration. And so I want to thank you for being here today, and I want to thank you each for your commitment to the Community of Democracies and its mission. And with that, I would now like to return the floor to His Excellency, Foreign Minister Aurescu. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Secretary General, for your address and for all your efforts that made our community and makes our community stronger in pursuing our shared democratic values, which are encapsulated in the Warsaw Declaration. And I would like to reassure you once again of Romania's strong commitment to the work of our community. And now, ladies and gentlemen, I have the distinct pleasure and privilege to give the floor to our keynote speaker, the Honorable Madeleine Albright, former U.S. Secretary of State, and as you know, who was together with former Foreign Minister Garrett of Poland, the architect behind the Warsaw Declaration. So, Madam Secretary of State, please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Foreign Minister Aurescu and Secretary General Garrett and Ambassador Leisner, Your Excellencies. I am honored to join you in celebrating the 20th anniversary of the Warsaw Declaration and the Community of Democracies. I had looked forward to traveling to Bucharest to attend this ministerial meeting. Although I regret that we could not meet in person, I am grateful that we could still gather virtually, because this meeting is too important to postpone. Your Excellencies, it's hard for me to believe that more than 2 decades have passed since my friend Bronislaw Garrett and I met in Warsaw with representatives of more than 100 democracies. Let me remind you of the context. As the 20th century drew to a close, the world was fascinated by breakthroughs in engineering and research. Among them, the cloning of sheep, the mapping of DNA, the development of new medicines, cell phones that were not the size of bricks. I have no quarrel with better living through science, but I have never believed it is the best gauge for measuring progress. A much more meaningful yardstick is the spread of democracy. As Secretary of State, I found that if I ran down the list of challenges faced by the world, from terrorism and war to poverty and pollution, democracy was the surest path to progress. I wanted to do everything I could to help democracy succeed while I was in office. So when my Director of Policy Planning, Mort Halpin, proposed gathering all the world's democracies, I was eager to take up the suggestion. We felt the timing for such a project was apt. The number of electoral democracies had quadrupled from 30 to about 120 during the preceding 3 decades. But this meant that there were also more places where democratic governments were threatened. The danger was especially present where democracies were fragile and new. Across Latin America, Central Europe, Africa, and Asia, we saw that people who had welcomed the onset of democracy were becoming frustrated and feeling left behind in the new global economy. Many felt exploited and betrayed by their elected officials, and they worried that corruption and crime could never be rooted out. Just a decade earlier, when the Berlin Wall had come down, there had been dancing in the streets, but by 1999, some of the euphoria was dissipating. There was danger in some quarters that optimism would give way to defeatism and open the door for failed approaches from the past. And in some countries, there was even a growing nostalgia for order and discipline of communist rule. The risk that democracy would be taken for granted was very much on our minds when we first convened the Community of Democracies. When that first conference was held, many predicted that it would be our last. Some felt that such a community was not needed because democracy had already triumphed. Others argued that the process of convening a group was undesirable because it would cause friction over whom to include, and still others warned that it would be naive to place too much faith in democracy when the world would always be governed more by interest than by ideals. As it happened, the meeting proved extremely successful. Those who came to Warsaw with doubts left with new grounds for enthusiasm, and the primary reason was our host, Foreign Minister Garrett. Minister Garrett believed that the centerpiece of our deliberation should be a declaration through which participants could reaffirm their commitment to democracy and outline their shared concepts about what democracy requires. Although there were many compelling reasons to issue the Warsaw Declaration, one of them was very personal. For half a century, the name Warsaw had been linked to the Warsaw Pact, and Minister Garrett told me that he wanted the chance through the Community of Democracies to link the name of the city he loved with a cause truly in keeping with the history and spirit of the Polish people. In addressing the conference, Minister Garrett spoke to us from his own life experience concerning the value of freedom and also its fragility. In his welcoming remarks, he declared, and I quote, that the emergence of democracy was the most important development of the 20th century, unquote. But he also reminded us that the gift of freedom was never fully safe, because from one direction or another, the principles of freedom will always be opposed. This remains relevant today, for as we all know, democracy is facing a new and rigorous round of tests. These tests have been made more complicated by the COVID pandemic and its economic fallout, which is providing an excuse for leaders with anti-democratic tendencies to silence critics and tighten their political grip. 20 years ago, we worried primarily about new and fragile democracies. Today, we are also concerned about leaders in established democracies who claim that freedom must yield to higher priorities. History teaches us that individuals and groups who crave and then abuse authority will always be present among us. But to them, we now have answers, and one of those answers is the Community of Democracies. As we mark the 20th anniversary of the Warsaw Declaration, I am proud that the community continues to play an active role in the global democracy movement. I have also been impressed by the community's new focus on resilience and women's leadership, and I welcome the forthcoming statement by the Governing Council reaffirming the importance of democracy and the principles of the Warsaw Declaration at this time of crisis. Each of our countries are grappling with serious challenges, including a once-in-a-century pandemic. Governing in a democracy has also been made more complicated by the dizzying pace of technological change and the stresses caused by globalization. Some might find it overwhelming to see so many democracies dealing with so many similar problems. I see a silver lining. It means that none of us is alone. We know that creating a strong and healthy democracy is hard, but across the globe, remote villages and vast urban centers, we have seen people come together and raise their voices on behalf of social justice, the environment, universal access to education, equal opportunity, and civil rights. These are the building blocks of progress and the heart of what democracy is all about. Looking to the future, we know that the desire for democratic government remains deep and wide. We also know it is the only system that contains within itself the capacity through open debate to heal itself. Like other profound human aspirations, freedom can never be fully achieved. It is not a possession, it is a pursuit. And as today's events make clear, it is the star by which the community of democracies must continue to navigate in the years to come. Thank you all for participating, and my thanks once again for inviting me to speak. Thank you so much.
I thank you so much, Madam Secretary, for your very kind and meaningful words, which indeed reinforce and reinsure our trust in our values and give, as always, guidance to the work of our community. And your words at the opening of the first ministerial conference in 2000 come to my mind when you said, democracy is the one road we can all walk down together. And these are the creed of our organization and are as valid as ever. Your emblematic presence with us today at this anniversary moment, and despite these special circumstances, reinforces and catalyzes our commitment to our common shared democratic values and highlights once again that in order to overcome such crisis situations and to turn stronger, we need to reinforce our cooperation at diplomatic level, at other levels. We are grateful for your work in the service of democratic values, in the service of our community, and I express once again our heartfelt appreciation and highest consideration. And because you mentioned your desire to come to Bucharest, I would like to renew my invitation for you to come next year when we will organize, hopefully, a full-fledged, in physical shape, ministerial conference in order to mark appropriately the achievements of this presidency and, well, the progress of our community. Thank you once again, Madam Secretary. I would like now to invite Her Excellency Mrs. Maria Leisner, former Secretary General of the Community of Democracies, to address her message. Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Excellency Foreign Minister Aurescu, Excellencies Secretary General Thomas Garrett, Madam Secretary, dear friends and Excellencies all. I don't know if you can see me, but I can see you. I am deeply honored to be invited to participate in this very, very important meeting. It's 20 years ago, more or less today, since the Community of Democracies was formed in Warsaw, as we could hear from Secretary Albright, an initiative that sought to build a bridge between established democracies and new democracies, and that sought to open a new parameter in global politics, the democracy parameter. The aim was to capitalize on the fact that democracy had become a global norm and find instruments for protecting that novel victory of global values based on the 19 principles of democracy. And I do appreciate what Secretary Albright, you said, that there was already a worry at that time that this might be a passing moment, but you took it and you used it. We were then at the height of the democracy revolution that had swept the globe, from starting with the disintegration of the fascist regimes in Southern Europe, and do remember that we were not democracies in Europe at the time, and until the disintegration of Soviet-style communism, then the authoritarianism was replaced globally with a collective decision-making based on ideas of political equality and framed by globally agreed political and civil rights. When I was first drawn into the community of democracies, it still had the shape of a series of ministerial conferences where each rotating presidency put its own mark on the activities. Then Poland offered to set up a permanent secretariat hosted by its foreign ministry. And a few years before the ministerial meeting in Vilnius in 2011, I was asked, and I was then Sweden's ambassador for democracy, and Lithuania's very energetic chair, Mr. Ambassador Paviljonis, asked me to chair a working group on reforms. In that working group, we decided it was time to propose a new step in the development of the community, to reach out to a larger group of both old and new democracies, to energize the community as a true meeting place of democratic countries, to broaden the community, to more vigorously encompass civil society and other democracy actors, and to create an international secretariat headed by a secretary general. I wish to particularly mention that this package would not have been possible neither to craft nor to realize had it not been for Morten Halprin, whom I'm very happy to see here among us today, one of the architects on the US side when the community was first established. After the reforms were adopted, I was asked to head the new permanent secretariat, and I came to stay for 5 very eventful and gratifying years, and I wish to extend a deep, heartfelt thank you for that possibility. I believe we did make the community into an increasingly intense meeting place for democracies and democrats, not only during the ministerials, but we also developed, as you may remember, the Democracy Forum at the United Nations, both in New York and in Geneva, as it was first initiated by Chile in the early years of the community. We sought to institutionalize the community, setting up a network of focal points with whom we wove a tight net of good relations. The Governing Council started to rotate between capitals instead of taking place only in Washington. And at each meeting, we invited guests and speakers to highlight issues regarding the development agenda and countries. Because our vision was that this would be the brain of democracies, intending to support democracy worldwide with the instruments that foreign ministries had at their disposal. But civil society also sat at the tables, and they spoke up to elected officials, and a youth pillar and an academic network. Do you still hear me? Do you still hear me? Yes, okay, thank you. And we initiated a number of programs run by member countries and supported by the Permanent Secretariat all over the globe, twinning programs with new democracies and bringing people together to share experiences, trainings for young people on new technology for democracy, and trainings for women and many other programs. I'm deeply grateful for those years when we still had the democracy winds with us, and we were able to push the agenda forward. We were able to transform the community of democracies from a series of conferences to an almost fully fledged multilateral organization. Today, however, 20 years later, democracy as a global is challenged. Multilateral cooperation, whose spine has always been democracies, is increasingly challenged, and various conflicts takes its place. And so there is a greater need than ever for a meeting place of democracies and democrats. We need to meet, we need to bond, we need to refine our tools to again make democracy an unquestioned global norm. And Tom, you must have a more important work than ever. I deeply admire your efforts, and I wish you all the best with the coming years. Honored chair and incoming chairs, you have a most challenging and inspiring task to bring the community of democracies against the global wind to its 3rd decade more needed than ever. But as Secretary Albright said, we're not alone. People want to have their voices heard and the votes counted all over the world. We know that that is what every human being wants. And this is the only base for a just and peaceful society. So I wish to say happy 20th birthday to the community of democracies, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency, for your kind words, for your intervention, for all your efforts and endeavors in the service of our community, and of course for being with us today, because your presence today shows us that the work for implementing the Warsaw Declaration is a continuous effort, and there is a lot to be done in the near future, but not only. Thank you so much once again. But before passing the floor to our distinguished participants, it is my great pleasure to thank all of you for the cooperation which made possible the adoption of the Governing Council Statement. The Governing Council Statement marking 2 decades of the Community of Democracies, which will be made public immediately. This document encapsulates and reaffirms our trust in the Warsaw Declaration principles and will further guide our work and the community's activity in the future. It is a reference document, and I would invite everybody to take a good look at it. And it will be available on the websites of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Romania and of the Community of Democracies, as well as on social media. And now, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, let me turn to the intervention segment of the anniversary conference, and I would like to invite the Secretary General to co-chair this meeting with me in my capacity as representative of the Presidency of the Community of Democracies. I thank him for sharing with me this task, and I would like to inform you that we appreciate the interest which was shown by the participants in this conference. There is a high level of interest. There is a large number of member states which have indicated their wish to make national statements. Currently we have 29 member states and other participants on the list of speakers. And I would like to invite now Mr. Jacek Czaputowicz, Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Poland, to take the floor. I'm so glad, Jacek, that you're with us today, and I would like to commend your efforts in your capacity as recent chairmanship of the Community of Democracies. So, Jacek, you have the floor.
Thank you for taking over the chairmanship from Poland. We cooperated on that last year, and we are very satisfied, as everybody, with your very successful chairmanship of the Community of Democracy. 20 years ago, on the initiative of Poland and the United States of America, representatives of 106 countries gathered in Warsaw to discuss their future cooperation and to reinforce democratic values. All the participants signed a document known today as the Warsaw Declaration, we referred to often already during today's discussion. They obliged themselves to develop and protect democratic freedoms, to strengthen democratic institutions, as well as to increase participation of their societies in political life. The declaration became the cornerstone for the creation of the Community of Democracies. I would like to thank the Secretary General of the Community of Democracies and the Romanian Presidency for the joint work and exchange of experience by all countries participating in this coalition to promote the basic value of the modern world, that is, democracy and the rule of law. The COVID-19 pandemic has even more clearly highlighted the importance of developing and consolidating democratic values. We see how essential it is to build mechanisms to protect all vulnerable and marginalized groups. It has also shown that any restrictions on civil and political rights should be introduced in a cautious manner and only when there is a real social need for them. Unfortunately, last month, have shown that some governments have used the pandemic as an excuse to implement restrictions which have severely impaired human rights and fundamental freedoms. Some countries and some authorities have limited the freedom of the press and expression and have restricted access to information for their citizens. Some of them have centralized their power, expanded practices against marginalized groups and persons such as women or religious and ethnic minorities. The post-COVID-19 world is to become digital, and we can use this word virtual. During the lockdown, hundreds of millions of people across the globe have been forced to work from home, while their children have to take online classes. Abandoning places where we socialize and engage in human interaction will become the new norm for most of us. Digitalization of human life may deepen disrespect for other faith, cultural and linguistic plurality, ideological differences, and political dissent, unless we concentrate our efforts on building a universe of tolerance and respect for diversities and differences. Ladies and gentlemen, the global epidemic has shown the true significance of democracies, democratic values listed in the Warsaw Declaration. It has shown that democracies, thanks to their self-regulatory mechanisms and their constant public scrutiny, are better equipped to respond to crises faster and with better results. We can see that the reinforcement of democratic values, multilateralism, and close cooperation are now more important than ever. The community of democracies is a great platform to do that in, and I hope it will remain as such also in the future. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Jacek, for your very insightful words, and I'm really honored that the Warsaw Declaration, which was adopted 20 years ago, is now reinforced and complemented by the Bucharest Statement we adopted today. I would like now to invite the Honorable Lord Ahmad of Wimbledon, Human Rights Minister of the United Kingdom, to take the floor. But first I would like to also commend the successful chairmanship assumed by UK some time ago of the Community of the Democracies. So, Lord Ahmad, you have the floor.
Foreign Minister, colleagues, friends, Secretary General, Secretary of State Albright, it's a real pleasure to join you here from sunny London today on this real celebration, 20 years on since the establishment of the Community of Democracies. May I firstly extend our best wishes to Romania and wish them success, as I'm sure I speak for every participant, for the continuation of their presidency. This is, I'm sure we all reflect, a poignant time for Romania. It's 30 years or so on since the fall of communism in December 1989, and we remember that time very clearly. But today, COVID-19 has also brought the interdependence of democracy and human rights into even sharper focus. And as the pandemic continues to impact all our communities without boundaries, it has also highlighted the very interdependency of humanity. This virus recognizes no borders. Success in beating the virus, as our Prime Minister Boris Johnson has said, is about working together. It is about building a global recovery, and it lies in working together in a coordinated manner and effort. We must, of course, as we all recognize, be resolute in that effort. And democratic norms are eroding, as has been said by the Foreign Minister of Poland already, as countries resort to autocratic measures to control the pandemic. We must not allow this pandemic to stifle the voices of our most vulnerable, the most vulnerable around the world. It is now that we must reaffirm our commitment to this community's core values, its core goals: democracy, human rights, and importantly, the rule of law. This 20th anniversary allows us to reflect, yes, on past achievements, but also to prepare for a post-COVID-19 world. We stand united in partnering with civil society, who play an incredible role, assisting emerging democracies and advocating democratic standards through international cooperation. Our recent Governing Council statement, of which I am very proud, demonstrates all of this, and we will support our global recovery efforts. As many countries now begin to emerge from a state of lockdown, and it's true of the United Kingdom, it is important to remember that any restrictions we have imposed have an expiry date. Restrictions on human rights must firstly be lawful under both international human rights law and indeed national law, and they must be absolutely essential for that time. They should be targeted, time-limited, and subject to regular review. Moving forward, as we reflect on this pandemic, each of us individually, through our families, through our communities, through our nations and globally, will have a unique perspective, a unique story to tell. And our actions now will be remembered for many generations to come. It is for us to determine how we best manage and resolve this crisis, and it will be the defining action of our generation. If I may leave you with one of my own reflections from this pandemic, we have once again been witness to the adaptability and resilience of democracy. And as we all know, time after time, no matter what the issue, no matter what the challenge, democracy is proven to prevail, and it will prevail time and therefore, in closing, my congratulations again to this wonderful community. We are still upholding democracy on this, our 20th anniversary. And let's raise a glass and say a prayer that we see many, many more. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lord Ahmad, for your statement, and I would like to ask Thomas to take over for a little bit the task of co-chairing our meeting. So, Thomas, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. And I would like to now invite His Excellency, Mr. Teodoro Rivera Newman, Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Chile, to speak.
Estimado señor Ministro de Relaciones Exteriores de Rumania, Bogdan Aurescu, estimado Secretario General de Comunidad de las Democracias, Garrett, estimado Ministro de Relaciones Exteriores y delegados, señoras y señores. Hace ya 20 años, diversos países suscribimos la Declaración de Varsovia, manifestando nuestro compromiso con el respeto a los valores democráticos y de la promoción de los derechos humanos. En este 20º aniversario de la Comunidad de las Democracias, reafirmamos que dicha voluntad sigue presente más fuerte que nunca. Parte de las reflexiones que dieron origen a la comunidad es la consideración que la democracia debe mantener un constante proceso de legitimación en dos dimensiones fundamentales. Primero, la ampliación del espacio cívico y segundo, el incremento de la eficacia de las políticas públicas. Solo a través de la profundización de la participación de la sociedad civil es posible identificar áreas de acción que permitan políticas públicas eficaces, que refuercen la institucionalidad democrática. Dicha afirmación, en momentos que el mundo enfrenta una de las peores crisis sanitarias de su historia reciente, renuevan todo su sentido. La pandemia actual nos enfrenta a una nueva realidad. Esta crisis sanitaria y económica ha obligado a repensar el espacio público, la participación ciudadana y las formas en que interactuamos como sociedad. Muchos de nuestros gobiernos se han visto en la necesidad de implementar medidas que restringen ciertas libertades fundamentales, como la libertad de circulación de las personas en virtud de un bien mayor, como es la salud de nuestra población. Este nuevo escenario nos impondrá nuevos desafíos en cómo aseguramos la ampliación del espacio cívico y la eficacia de nuestras políticas públicas. Por ejemplo, a fines del año 2020, Chile tiene previsto varios procesos electorales. Nuestro desafío será garantizar elecciones participativas y seguras en un contexto de pandemia, una situación completamente nueva que no hemos experimentado en nuestra historia electoral. El concepto de democracia está en constante evolución, debiendo los gobiernos hacerse cargo de nuevos fenómenos que ponen a prueba las instituciones políticas. Como comunidad de las democracias, debemos seguir trabajando por los principios y prácticas consagrados en la Declaración de Varsovia. La retroalimentación y el compartir experiencias nos brinda una oportunidad para abordar las problemáticas actuales y seguir trabajando por una democracia más consolidada y con instituciones más sólidas. Finalmente, deseo agradecer a la Presidencia de Rumania y al ministro Aurescu por este evento de conmemoración. Muchas gracias.
I want to thank the distinguished Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Chile for this message. I also wish to commend Chile for its successful 2018 rotating chairmanship of the Community of Democracies. I would now like to invite His Excellency Mr. Augusto Santos Silva, Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Portuguese Republic, to speak. Mr. Minister.
Thank you. Thank you, dear Secretary General, dear Minister, dear Bogdan, dear all. Portugal is a founding member of the Community of Democracies. We are fully committed to the Warsaw Declaration and now to the Bucharest Declaration, both emphasizing the interdependence between peace, development, human rights, and democracy. You know that COVID-19 has reinforced the need for greater cooperation, coordination, and solidarity in terms of public health. But it has also reinforced it has also underlined the pertinence of the multilateral system in the fields of public health, prosperity, and security. We believe democracy is paramount to fight the increasing challenges we are facing. In the absence of democratic solutions to address these challenges, other solutions and other actors, less representative, inclusive, and democratic, would emerge. From the very beginning of the pandemic, the safeguard of democracy and human rights has been a priority for Portugal. During the pandemic, we have adopted measures to protect human rights, paying particular attention to vulnerable people. Let me give you such an example as the decision to temporarily grant the right to stay and access to rights and services to migrants and asylum seekers with pending applications. I would like to conclude by reiterating Portugal's full commitment to the values and standards enshrined in the Warsaw and Bucharest declarations. We believe that it is through enhanced dialogue with all stakeholders, including civil society, that human rights and the values of democracy can be protected and promoted for the benefit of each and everyone around the world. Thank you very much.
And thank you, Excellency, for your statement. And I now return the floor to Foreign Minister Aurescu.
Well, thank you so much, Augusto. Thank you so much, Thomas. Let me now invite the Honorable Ambassador Zubairu Dada, Minister of State for Foreign Affairs of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, to take the floor. Your Excellency, the floor is yours. Okay, it seems that we have a technical problem, so we will go to the next speaker. I would like now to invite His Excellency, Mr. Nasser Bourita, Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation of the Kingdom of Morocco, to take the floor. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. C'est un plaisir de participer aux célébrations du 20e anniversaire de la Déclaration de Varsovie. Cette célébration est d'autant plus importante que le thème choisi aujourd'hui trouve sa pertinence dans le contexte difficile de la pandémie actuelle. Je félicite et remercie donc la Roumanie pour la tenue de cette rencontre qui tombe à point nommé. Je voudrais aussi reconnaître et rendre un hommage particulier à Madame la secrétaire d'État, Madeleine Albright, pour son action dans l'émergence de cette communauté. Monsieur le Président, je voudrais partager avec vous 3 messages essentiellement. Mon premier message est en réalité un constat. La participation de mon pays, le Royaume du Maroc, à cette célébration s'inscrit dans le prolongement naturel de l'engagement du Maroc en faveur de la démocratie et traduit son attachement à la bonne gouvernance. Le Maroc a toujours été fidèle à son identité démocratique dans tous les domaines, qu'ils soient migratoires, religieux ou sociaux. Le Royaume est en effet le seul pays arabe et maghrébin à avoir intégré le conseil d'administration de la communauté dès 2006, à la faveur des réformes politiques et économiques mises en œuvre. C'est également dans ce cadre que le Royaume a renouvelé son engagement auprès de cette communauté à l'occasion de la 31e réunion de son conseil d'administration en février 2020 à Bucarest. Il nous a aussi été donné d'augmenter notre contribution volontaire au budget prévisionnel de notre communauté. Les temps inédits que nous vivons nous rappellent que la démocratie n'est jamais acquise, qu'il suffit d'une crise pour qu'elle soit mise à l'épreuve. Et ça me ramène à mon deuxième message, qui est que la gestion de la pandémie s'est faite avec son lot de contraintes, mais aussi d'opportunités pour la démocratie. Par ces défis inédits, la pandémie a indubitablement eu un impact certain sur nos vies. Il a suscité des réactions rapides, fortes, parfois contraignantes. Le ralentissement de l'économie, la fermeture des frontières, les restrictions de déplacement sont autant de mesures qui ont impacté notre quotidien. La pandémie a aussi eu un effet sur notre mode de gouvernance. Pour autant, l'impact de la pandémie recèle aussi un grand nombre de potentialités démocratiques. L'efficacité de la réponse de certains États et l'attention portée aux populations vulnérables peut renforcer le contrat social. Le dialogue entre la science et la politique n'a jamais été aussi fécond. La coopération entre les différents secteurs politiques, économiques et de la recherche a prouvé son efficacité. La mobilisation de la société civile a été exemplaire et a permis de constater la vitalité démocratique. La transparence a constitué le seul antidote à la propagation de l'infodémie. Mon troisième message, Monsieur le Président, me ramène vers mon pays pour évoquer les mesures prises afin d'assurer une gestion ouverte de la pandémie. Le choix démocratique du Maroc est irréversible. Cet engagement démocratique a conditionné à la pandémie du Covid-19. Toutes les mesures prises ont été d'abord et avant tout axées sur la priorité absolue donnée aux citoyens, à sa sécurité, sur toute autre considération. Ils ont été prises avec rigueur et célérité, mais aussi dans un esprit consultatif et participatif. Aujourd'hui, plus que jamais, le Maroc, consignataire de la déclaration de Varsovie, réaffirme l'engagement pour son esprit et sa lettre, car c'est précisément dans les circonstances exceptionnelles, comme celles que nous vivons, que l'idéal démocratique doit demeurer le ciment de nos sociétés. C'est là notre conviction et c'est là aussi notre défi. Je vous remercie, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you so much, Mr. Minister, for your kind words. Merci infiniment, Monsieur le Ministre. I would like now to ask Thomas once again to take over. Thank you, Thomas.
Thank you, and we will now hear the message of Her Excellency Mrs. Michelle Bachelet Eria, the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights.
Dear friends, it is a pleasure to mark the 20th anniversary of the Conference of the Community of Democracies and the adoption of the Warsaw Declaration by many member states. The Warsaw Declaration committed states to respect the right of persons belonging to minorities or disadvantaged groups to equal protection of the law and the freedom to enjoy their own culture, to profess and practice their own religion and use their own language. It also emphasized the right of every human being to participate in public affairs, to equal access to public services, to freedom of opinion and of expression, including to exchange and receive ideas and information through any media, to privacy and to freedom of peaceful assembly, among other human rights. These principles are vitally important today. The COVID-19 pandemic is a test for all societies. Democratic systems start from a strong base because they can count on public participation, official transparency and accountability, as well as media that are able to investigate and report potential policy gaps. These are tremendous advantages for devising effective public health measures based on public compliance and trust, as well as policies that mitigate the devastating social and economic consequences of COVID-19. Now it is a time for more democracy, not less. Recent trends among states confronted by the COVID-19 pandemic are a source of concern, as they include unchecked executive power, increased deployment of the military, disproportionate penalties and enforcement, and restrictions on speech. Such measures do not advance effective pandemic responses. They fuel contagion by cutting off key information and deepening public mistrust, which undermines compliance. As the public health situation evolves, we must be vigilant that the use of emergency measures does not become the norm. Any restrictions of human rights should be systematically re-evaluated to assess whether they remain necessary and proportionate. Several Community of Democracy member states have taken human rights-based measures to counter the pandemic, and I encourage them to share the lessons learned during this critical time with my office as well as other stakeholders. We are working to centralize and circulate this kind of experience-based guidance. We have also issued detailed and practical advice regarding emergency measures, the civic space, detention, migrants, minorities, women, LGBTI communities, people with disabilities. In addition, we have developed a framework of 10 human rights indicators to enable clarity in identifying especially hard-hit and vulnerable groups and to assist effective policies to address those harms. My office will be glad to assist you to utilize this approach. Regional intergovernmental organizations like the Community of Democracies are vital to this work of upholding human rights to ensure effective and inclusive policies. This is an important platform to channel assistance and guidance to countries and to lead real and sustained change. I wish you then very fruitful discussions. Thank you very much.
I wish to thank the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights for her message and her words of support to the Warsaw Declaration. We will now hear the message of Her Excellency Mrs. Vera Jourova, Vice President of the European Union Commission and the European Union Commissioner for Values and Transparency. We thank Her Excellency, the European Commissioner, for her involvement on issues of such interest for democratic values. We shall now hear from the European Commissioner.
Dear Ministers, High Representatives, Honorable Madeleine Albright, dear participants, thank you for inviting me to take part in this event. Unfortunately, I cannot be connected live, but technology helps us to still interact. Thank you also for organizing this event to mark the 20th anniversary of the adoption of the Warsaw Declaration, which led to the founding of the Community of Democracies. Every opportunity to celebrate democracy is a precious moment, and every moment when states are reminded of their commitments to democracy is a gain for citizens living in democracies across the world. We are going through extraordinary times that put unprecedented pressure on us individually, and also on our societies. We are worried about our health, our jobs, and the state of our economies. But people are also worried about their rights more generally and the state of democracies. And rightly so. The rise of extremist forces is not new, but what is new is that they rise from both right and the left at the same time. These are all global challenges, but I would like to give you a brief European perspective. In Europe, since the beginning of the coronavirus crisis, we were very clear. The response has to respect our fundamental principles and human rights. By killing the virus, we cannot kill democracy. To deal with the health threats, emergency measures were introduced in the vast majority of EU states. They are legitimate actions, but they come with restrictions of some fundamental rights. This is why they must be limited to what is necessary and strictly proportionate and cannot mean switching off national constitutions or EU law. They have to be limited in time and face scrutiny of the people through their elected parliamentarians and through the watchdog role of civil society and media. We have entered in the EU in a new phase when such emergency measures are gradually replaced by more targeted interventions by governments until all restrictions should be fully lifted. We are looking at the holy trinity of democracy, of rule of law and fundamental rights. One cannot exist without the other. This is why in the European Commission we are looking at all of them together. We plan to reflect key rule of law developments stemming from the crisis in the upcoming first ever annual Rule of Law report, which will describe the situation in all the EU member states. We are also working on a new fundamental rights strategy and a European democracy action plan. Free and independent media are also one of the pillars of democracy under threat. Now it is more important than ever that journalists are able to do their job freely to ensure that our citizens have access to crucial information. And the pandemic has triggered an infodemic. With weaker media, it created a breeding ground for disinformation. It is why we have recently adopted new guidelines on disinformation during COVID-19. We need to become more assertive, detect better organized foreign-sponsored disinformation. We need to work with platforms and strengthen civil society. Lying is not the biggest problem. The fact we believe in those lies so easily, it is a big problem. Our best defense against disinformation are free and plural media, informed and active citizens, and resilient democratic institutions in which they can trust. Ladies and gentlemen, democracy means also respect for every individual and support for the less fortunate in our societies. The COVID-19 crisis is exacerbating pre-existing inequalities. Due to stigma, stereotypes and racial discrimination, many people face additional challenges. As part of our recovery plans after the crisis, we have a duty to cater for groups suffering the most. To conclude, allow me to quote Václav Havel. He was spot on when he wrote, "The natural disadvantage of democracy is that it is extremely tiring to those who mean it honestly, while it allows almost everything to those who do not take it seriously. Let us all not get tired and defend democracy with all our wisdom and responsibility. Who else but the community of democracies should play a leading role in this? I am really counting on you. Thank you for the attention, and I wish you all a fruitful discussion.
I would like to thank Her Excellency Ms. Vera Jourova for this important message and for her work in the service of democratic values. And let me please return the floor to Foreign Minister Aurescu.
Well, thank you so much. I would like now to invite His Excellency Mr. Audun Halvorsen, Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Kingdom of Norway, to take the floor. And allow me to reiterate my congratulations to Norway for its election as non-permanent member of the United Nations Security Council. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Minister, and let me state how grateful we are for the vote of confidence we have been given by the members of the United Nations as a non-permanent member of the Security Council. Excellencies, in recent months we have witnessed how vulnerable the democratic principles that we all support can be in times of uncertainty and crisis, when extraordinary measures are introduced in ways that are not proportional to the situation or limited in time. We have seen examples of the pandemic being used as a pretext to increase government control at the expense of rule of law and the separation of power. But we have also seen strong international engagement, as racism and discrimination are not limited to a few countries only. And across the world, including in Norway, we have witnessed a mobilization against racial discrimination and xenophobia. The current circumstances remind us of why a competent, independent and impartial judiciary is one of the core democratic principles of the Warsaw Declaration that we celebrate today. To ensure that minorities have the same access to justice and protection of their fundamental rights as the majority. Mr. Chair, several dilemmas have become more prominent in light of COVID-19. And one of them concerns limitations in the freedom of speech and access to information, often motivated by an increased flow of disinformation related to the pandemic. Full transparency and access to reliable information from day one is a crucial aspect in stopping the spread of the pandemic. Lack of transparency, on the other hand, inevitably leads to lack of knowledge and a lack of trust, and may cause indecisiveness, inaction, or even actions in the public that help spread the pandemic. Therefore, it is more important than ever that we join forces to fight disinformation while supporting independent, fact-based journalism. We also see that algorithms in social media can reinforce the spread of misinformation, and this means that we, as individuals, have a responsibility not to contribute to the dissemination. We need a collective push to increase public awareness of these issues and to protect the principles of democracy and rule of law. Mr. Chair, let me conclude by underlining that first and foremost, COVID-19 has reminded us of how important the multilateral system is. Well-functioning institutions at the national level are vital in order to deal with the domestic situation. But COVID-19 is a global challenge that can only be solved through global cooperation. And the community of democracies can add value only if we work together to protect, preserve, and make effective use of the existing multilateral system, first and foremost, the United Nations. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Deputy Minister, for your words. We will hear now the message of His Excellency Mr. Stephen Biegun, Deputy Secretary of State of the United States of America.
Foreign Minister Aurescu, Secretary General Garrett, I thank you and your teams for organizing this important discussion to commemorate the 20th anniversary of the Community of Democracies and the Warsaw Declaration. Secretary Albright, thank you for your tireless efforts to champion democracy and your ongoing support for the Community of Democracies. My team shared with me some of the words you used when you launched this community in 2000 on behalf of the United States. One line from your remarks stood out to me. You said, like the lantern in the coal mine, the vigor of civil society is a measure of the vigor of a democracy. If it lacks oxygen, freedom will start to flicker. If it flourishes, liberty's light will continue to shine. 20 years later, these remarks continue to have strong resonance in the work of the members of this community to support and reinforce democratic governance, and they have particular resonance for we Americans at this challenging moment. The hallmark of a strong democracy is an active civil society. In the United States, we are once again seeing and experiencing the power of citizens to shape our own government. This process can often feel messy and uncomfortable, but as your remarks 20 years ago suggested, our liberty rests on empowering civil society to be a catalyst for democratic change and continual renewal, and to ensure the government reflects the will of its people, all of its people. In recent months, we have seen how some governments exploited the coronavirus pandemic to restrict human rights and fundamental freedoms, and sought to leverage health assistance to reinforce authoritarian practices globally. We have seen them use disinformation, censor independent media, scapegoat religious and other minority groups, restrict access to the internet, expand mass surveillance, stifle political and civic activism, and suspend the rule of law. Yet it's precisely in these challenging times, when more is demanded of us, that democracies must clearly acknowledge what we stand for and protect our values. Nations around the world are looking to us to demonstrate why the freedoms at the heart of our system of governance remain the best way forward. America's greatest strength has always been its hopeful vision of human progress. We seek progress not only because it makes a better world for our own people, but because it makes a better world for all people. The United States is pleased to celebrate the 20th anniversary of the Community of Democracies. Guided by our vision and our values, the United States stands with you in supporting human progress anchored in democratic principles. We support a vision of a world made up of strong, sovereign, and independent nations thriving side by side in prosperity, in freedom, and at peace. And we reaffirm our shared values of liberty, human rights, democracy, and rule of law. Thank you very much.
Well, I thank the Deputy Secretary of State for his message, and I would like to emphasize how much we appreciate his words, and we are grateful for the constant support provided by the United States for this community of democracies. Now, again, back to Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. I would like to invite now His Excellency Mr. Lashe Darsan, the Deputy Minister for Foreign Affairs of Georgia, to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Excellencies. At the outset, let me thank the Romanian Presidency of the Community of Democracies and the Permanent Secretariat for organizing this online anniversary conference that is a good opportunity to consider the state of democracy in line with current developments and challenges. Ladies and gentlemen, 20 years ago, we came together to join our efforts in pursuit of common goal of advancing and protecting democratic freedoms and supporting consolidation of democratic values around the globe. The Warsaw Declaration brought us together to cooperate, then together, and encourage each other to uphold its principles. 20 years after, the community's raison d'etre is as important as a backdrop declining democracy in the world, with growing countries moving towards authoritarian rules. The COVID-19 crisis has further demonstrated the crucial need for resilient democracies countering the spread of disinformation with due respect for citizens' freedom of expression and need for access to free, reliable, trustworthy, accurate, and science-based information. Stemming from the above-mentioned, the role of the Community of Democracies in bringing its steering vision to life has gained even more importance. Excellencies, as one of the first signatories of the Warsaw Declaration, Georgia remains committed to support and uphold principles enshrined therein. We believe that democratic reforms and strength of its institutions are one of the best defense against challenges, be it the occupation of the Georgia faces or the COVID-19 pandemic we will in today's world. Effectiveness, accountability, and inclusiveness of public institutions are important to overcome the current challenges. Besides, ensuring transparency and promoting open governance should be seen as the key elements for democratic resilience in times of systemic crisis that unites us all. Another important element for the success in these extraordinary circumstances is the new technologies. This is especially true today when the pandemic of the COVID-19 has further accelerated the need to develop new technologies technology's penetration in our daily lives. On the other hand, unfortunately, authoritarian states found it as an efficient tool to pursue their malign interests against democratic systems. Clear demonstration of its attacks target crises which many countries, including their own, has experienced several times. Among them, not so long ago, Russia planned and carried out a large-scale cyber attack against Georgia, which was intended to Georgian citizens and government structures by paralyzing the functioning of various organizations. After 75 years since the foundation of the UN, we still live in a world where the main principles of international law enshrined the UN Charter, including the principles of sovereignty, integrity, inviolability of border, interference into the internal affairs are violated. Multilateralism and rules-based order are under attack. Therefore, the list of challenges that democracy face include amid the outbreak of the COVID-19 is long. In many parts of the world, people experience human rights violations and already dire humanitarian situation. Let me share the worrisome experience of my country due to the Russian aggression and occupation. Regions of Abkhazia and Skin Valley suffer from the extreme deterioration of the humanitarian situation and increased human rights violations. Residents of these territories are deprived by the Russian occupation forces of access of humanitarian assistance and therefore the possibility to get a elementary, not to mention the challenges they faced during the COVID-19 pandemic, which led to death cases of the local population. Yet, despite the absence of effective control over the occupied territories, the government of Georgia has been undertaking proactive measures to prevent the spread of COVID-19 and combat it. Excellencies, in conclusion, based on experience of my country, the importance of reliable and consistent democratic institutions taking under practice around us. Institutions are properly resourced and appropriately to human rights that also underline the role of engagement decision-making, which is crucial for strengthening social responsibility and enhancing democratic processes and institutions. Having said that, we welcome the spirit of the Council statement, reaffirm our strong commitment to democracy and contribute towards fulfilling the common mission like it does. I thank you.
And I thank the Deputy Minister for Foreign Affairs of Georgia. I would like to now invite the Honorable Ambassador Zubairu, Minister of State Foreign Affairs of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, to speak to the gathering.
Thank you, Your Excellency Bogdan Aurescu, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Romania and President of the Community of Democracies, Your Excellencies, Foreign Ministers and Heads of Delegation, Your Excellency Thomas Garrett, the Secretary General, ladies and gentlemen. Let me commend the leadership of the government of Romania for the manner in which it has steered the affairs of the organization since assuming the presidency of this illustrious organization. Let me also extend gratitude to the Secretary General for his excellent and purposeful service rendered in making our organization adheres to its core values aspirations. As we commemorate the 20th anniversary of the Warsaw Declaration, may I, on behalf of the government and good people of Nigeria, express our heartfelt congratulations to the organization for reaching yet another milestone. Today we are reminded of the commitment we made 2 decades ago to defend and uphold democratic values as inscribed in the Warsaw Declaration. Unfortunately, the world is now witnessing a drastic change in view of the outbreak of COVID-19 pandemic, and this calls for sober reflection on the future of democracy. Your Excellencies, it is obvious that the pandemic is ravaging our world and affecting economic and health systems, as well as taking a toll on democracy. In a bid to flatten the curve of the pandemic, governments have taken unprecedented measures aimed at curbing the spread of the virus, protecting citizens, and saving the economy without considering its impact on democratic values. Indeed, the outbreak of the pandemic has resulted in the postponement of some local elections in my country, has adversely affected the countries. The development poses a serious threat to democracy, human rights, and governance. Mitigate the impact of COVID-19 on democracies globally is an urgent matter and must be treated as such. Therefore, we as members of the Community of Democracies did not relent in taking proactive measures to safeguard our democracies. There is no doubt that the task ahead of us is daunting, and to preserve our democracies in an unprecedented time occasioned by COVID-19 requires that we enhance cooperation and ensure that no country is left behind. In this regard, we must continue to support the role of the civil society in sustaining democratic values and ensuring transparent and inclusive governance. We must also support each other in establishing a strong cybersecurity mechanism that will identify, expose, and counter threats on our democratic principles. The countries of the Global South have a lot of work to do in this regard. Nigeria therefore sees this opportunity to urge fellow state parties to institutionalize legal responses and cyber laws to achieve cyber stability. In accordance with the ethos of the Global Commission on the Stability of Cyberspace, such legal and administrative visions should guarantee the four principles of responsibility, restraint, requirement to act by state and non-state actors, and respect for human rights. Furthermore, we must also preserve our electoral integrity through technical assistance in form of advanced technology to reduce person-to-person contact and strengthening mechanisms to conduct electoral processes remotely without reducing enfranchisement. In this connection, Nigeria is willing to partner with technologically advanced member countries in integrating the use of technology into our electoral processes. Your Excellencies, this auspicious occasion of the 20th anniversary, I wish to conclude by reiterating Nigeria's commitment to defending and upholding the principles and objectives of the Warsaw Declaration and reaffirm our willingness to cooperate with the Permanent Secretariat and member countries in furtherance of democratic values. Once again, happy anniversary to the Community of Democracies. Thank you.
And I thank the Minister of State Foreign Affairs of the Federal Republic of Nigeria for his kind words. I would now like to invite His Excellency, Mr. Velamveli Muralidharan, Minister of State for External Affairs of the Republic of India, to speak.
His Excellency Mr. Bogdan Aurescu, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Romania, Mr. Thomas E. Garrett, Secretary General, Community of Democracies, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I am happy to participate in our meeting today to commemorate the 20th anniversary of the Warsaw Declaration. 20 years ago, inspired by our democratic values, we had come together to adopt this landmark declaration to emphasize our commitment to uphold democratic principles and underline interdependence between democracy and development. As we confront the COVID-19 pandemic, the most serious challenge faced by humanity today, our commitment to democracy and democratic values has become even more important. Our individual as well as collective response to this pandemic will determine how democracy as a mode of governance is judged by the world at large. It will have a significant impact on consolidation of democracy in the world of tomorrow. As a populous, developing country and a free society, fighting COVID-19 is not a small challenge for India. In confronting this pandemic, we have been mindful of staying true to our democratic principles. Our response has shown how democracy, discipline, and decisiveness can come together to create a genuine people's movement. While we care for our own citizens, India is also extending helping hand to other partners in our neighborhood and beyond. Our Prime Minister, Mr. Narendra Modi, took the lead to organize meetings of leaders of the South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation, or SAARC, and participated in several international meetings such as the G20 Summit and the NAM Contact Group Summit meeting on COVID-19. As a major producer of pharmaceuticals and medical supplies, we have provided supplies to over 150 partner countries, proving our credentials as the pharmacy of the world. We have been ready to share India's medical expertise with others. We are active in the global efforts to develop remedies and vaccines. At the global level, the weaknesses in collective response to COVID-19 has put the spotlight on the limitations of the existing international system. In the post-COVID world, we need a new template of globalization based on fairness, equality, and humanity. We need international institutions that are more representative of today's world. We need to promote human welfare and not focus on economic growth alone. What we need is a reformed multilateralism which reflects contemporary realities and can respond to present-day challenges. India has long championed such initiatives. As the world fights COVID-19, we also need to fight the proliferation of false information. Just like terrorism, fake news and doctored videos are used to divide communities and countries and are a threat to democracies. We need to work together to overcome this challenge. The Warsaw Declaration underlines the value of exchanging experiences in the consolidation of democracy and identifying best practices that will strengthen democratic institutions. This is very relevant for the present times. India stands ready to work with other partners in the community of democracies and to play an important role in promoting global solidarity and enhancing democratic governance, including in the fight against COVID-19. I thank you for your attention.
And I thank the Minister of State for External Affairs of the Republic of India for his message. And I also congratulate India on its recent accession to a seat on the United Nations Security Council. I would like to return the program to Foreign Minister Aurescu.
Thank you. I would like to invite now Mr. Neris Germanas, Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Lithuania, to take the floor. Well, it seems we have a little technical problem, so I would like to invite now Mr. Paul Tesalu, Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Estonia, to take the floor. Sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. Excellencies, dear friends. 20 years have passed since the adoption of the Warsaw Declaration. Yet the democratic norms and principles we pledged to uphold then have not lost their importance today. On the contrary, their importance has grown. It is important not only to ensure the protection of freedom of expression, both online and offline, but of the pluralistic democratic debate. Free and independent media is an important pillar of every democratic society. We must therefore stand united against those who try to claim otherwise. Throughout the ongoing pandemic, countries around the world have taken measures to protect themselves. This pandemic has been accompanied by a massive infodemic, attempts to undermine democracies and thereby complicating the containment of virus. Democracies must therefore work together to fight against disinformation by providing their citizens with accurate and timely information. Regardless of the complexity of the current pandemic, the vulnerabilities highlighted by it will help to pave the way for future solutions. We must not forget that the strength of democracy resides in standing together for a common goal. Multilateralism is therefore not an option, but a necessity for when adapting to a post-pandemic world. Given how the crisis has served as a catalyst for using technological solutions in our day-to-day matters, we must take advantage of this momentum achieved. We must work to diminish the digital divides that exist between societies so that we could all benefit from the digital transformation, leaving no one behind. That is why Estonia and Singapore will organize an international video conference on the level of foreign ministers to stress the importance of digital transformation in all its aspects. The video conference titled Close the Digital Divides, Digital Response to COVID-19 will take place on Wednesday next week, the 1st of July, and I will invite you all to participate. Dear colleagues, President Woodrow Wilson has once said, democracy is not so much a form of government as a set of principles. So let us all continue to adhere to the principles of the Warsaw Declaration and going forward. And I thank you.
Well, thank you so much for your kind message. Let's try again with our colleague from Lithuania, Mr. Neris Germanas, Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs. I know that you're online. You have the floor, sir. Again, it seems that there is a technical problem with the message, which was pre-recorded from our colleague from Lithuania. So, Thomas, you have the floor once again. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. I would now like to invite His Excellency, Mr. Andrei Zherovsky, the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of North Macedonia, to speak.
Thank you very much, Secretary General. Dear colleagues, is everything okay? Yes? Okay. It gives me a great pleasure to have the opportunity to speak to you today on behalf of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, on behalf of the government of North Macedonia, because we are now officially a member of the Governing Council of the Community of Democracies since last November, and for us this is a very important moment, of course. I am particularly honored to be taking part as today's event marking the 20th anniversary of the Warsaw Declaration, as every of you mentioned, as my country is those that have adopted and adhere to the democratic principles of the Warsaw Declaration since its inception from 2000. As we are all aware, and I hope that all of you, dear colleagues, you are aware, North Macedonia is committed to advancing the democratic standards of living for our citizens. Evident from the progress we have made in the past 2.5 years vis-a-vis resolving bilateral issues both with our neighbors, Bulgaria and Greece, embarking upon complex domestic reforms, all of which have resulted of the acceleration of our Euro-Atlantic aspirations. We are now members of NATO. I hope that very soon we will start the accession talks with EU, because there's a finally there's a green light for that, then it's a completely different situation now in North Macedonia. So, dear colleagues, Your Excellencies, dear friends, as we speak, we are globally faced with an unprecedented challenge, like all of you mentioned, posed by the pandemic caused by the COVID-19 virus. And as the world as we know today, it's just several months ago, it's not the same world anymore. So no longer we have the same picture in front of us. In this sense, the democracies around the globe are struggling, so are we in North Macedonia, with the health crisis, which is having repercussions of the overall functioning of our democracy. We have a problem with the battery. In this crisis, we become more aware that multilateralism, time and again, proves its availability in times of global crisis like the current one, and therefore needs to be further strengthened and also, of course, promoted. And challenges posed by the health crisis necessitate unity and solidarity of the international community. Since March, North Macedonia is facing with significant challenges in dealing with this unknown pandemic, and the technical government is struggling with the social and economic consequences. The state of emergency in the entire territory was also established in my country in the duration of a 3-month period. This led to the government to derogate under Article 15 of the European Convention of Human Rights of the Council of Europe. And however, apart from the key challenges to maintain, of course, citizen health and not to overburden our health system, we have taken all the measures in view of respecting human rights and democracy while maintaining judicial reforms, as well as inclusiveness of all social stakeholders such as the civil society, media, of course, etc., etc. In this sense, and as underlined in the Governing Council statement, holding parliamentary elections in line with international election standards are an essential indicator of the state of democracy and the rule of law in our country, because on 15th of July we'll have early elections. All the leaders of the parliamentary political parties have reached a political agreement, which is very important, and we are taking all the necessary measures and preparing protocols, of course, to allow for free and fair elections in the midst of the pandemic, while respecting all safety protocols. And we are in contact with our friends who have already organized elections. Once again, let me underline that the democratic U-turn in North Macedonia since 2017, when the new government approached. There's a return of the rule of law, notably by engaging the scope of incompetence of the State Anti-Corruption Committee, improving human rights, fighting discrimination, improving social cohesion, creating better conditions for free expression and free press, enlarging the space for the civil society, and reestablishing democratic control of the security services. As I said, now being a 30th member of NATO, and with the European trajectory of the country firmly set, as we are determined to continue for our reforms, aligned legislation framework, institutional setup, and practices in line, of course, with the European ones. North Macedonia expects start of EU accession negotiations later this year to give further impetus in that regard. Finally, I will conclude with this. Let me congratulate dear colleagues, dear friends, the 20th anniversary of the Warsaw Declaration, to all of us, standing as a reminder of the important pledges we have all made, and may we continue to uphold our efforts to the solidarity. So thank you very much, dear colleagues.
I thank the distinguished Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of North Macedonia for his message. Now it's my honor to invite Her Excellency, Ms. Emanuela Claudia Del Rey, Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Italian Republic, speak.
Thank you. Let me first thank the Community of Democracy and its Permanent Secretariat for its work in support of the democratic values that unite us all. Today, more than ever, it is important to uphold the Warsaw Declaration and reaffirm our commitment to it. Indeed, our democracies are facing an unprecedented mix of challenges, some of which were triggered and reinforced by the current pandemic and its broader consequences. Our democratic societies should stand united in full solidarity and in defense of our common values. We should firmly reject the false claim about the alleged lack of effectiveness in our democratic systems when dealing with the COVID-19 crisis. Ours should not simply be a reactive posture. let us underline and let the world know about it, the outstanding results achieved by our democracies, which have proven to be adaptable to extraordinary times through extraordinary actions. Perhaps the primary strength of our community resides precisely in the ability of our democracies to enact exceptional measures while always keeping them strictly proportional, temporary, and fully transparent. No indiscriminate restrictions to our rights and freedom shall ever be tolerated in our societies. This is not a limit, rather, it is an advantage. It is precisely in this difficult context that our institutions should respond efficiently to the COVID-19 pandemic by protecting the health and well-being of our people, by contributing to the UN-led global response in support of fragile countries, while remaining committed to democratic values, the rule of law, the human rights. In fact, the global health emergency has emphasized that democratic values, rule of law and human rights are central to address and mitigate the impact of the crisis on societies, and also to promote a just, equitable and sustainable recovery, especially in the perspective of the implementation of the Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development. Let me also briefly touch upon the role of technology, which offers many opportunities to foster participation and engagement by the civic society, but also implies complex threats, such as the hybrid ones. In particular, let me mention misinformation, which might feed sentiments of distrust towards our democratic institutions, ultimately aiming at undermining them. This is why it is crucial for us to strive to improve the resilience of our societies vis-à-vis this new challenge by promoting correct information and investing in education, in awareness. In conclusion, we should not forget that strong democracies are instrumental to the fulfillment of multilateralism. Italy is strongly convinced of this. And effective multilateralism is not only a prerequisite to address global challenges, but also a vehicle to strengthen democratic systems in our own countries. This relationship is mutually reinforcing. A global order based on rules and international law will allow our democracies to thrive and vice versa. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Italian Republic for this message, and I return the program now to Foreign Minister Aurescu.
Well, thank you so much. I have now the pleasure to invite Mr. Kevin Casas Zamora, Secretary General of the International Idea, to take the floor. You have the floor, sir.
The 20th anniversary of the Community of Democracies is a joyous occasion. It is a reminder that the principles embodied by the Warsaw Declaration of 2000, the community's founding document, can stand the test of time. The right of citizens to choose their representatives through regular, free, and fair elections, the right of every person to equal protection of the law, the right of every person to freedom of opinion and of expression, the right of every person to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion, and so many other fundamental principles mentioned in this historic document are more necessary and more worthy of our efforts to protect them than ever before. I am here to celebrate the values underpinning the Community of Democracies and the contribution of the community to advancing democracy as beacons of hope in these uncertain times. International Idea looks forward to another 20 years of fruitful collaboration with an organization that we proudly regard as a dear sister and an indispensable partner.
I thank the Secretary General of the International Idea for his message, and I'm transferring back the mic to Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. I will now invite Mr. Patrician Lucian Russo, the Secretary of State, Coordinator of the Open Government Partnership from the General Secretariat of the Romanian government, to speak.
It's okay? It's okay?
Yes, it's fine. Please proceed.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor to participate today as the State Secretary of the Romanian government at the Community of Democracy video conference. The Open Government Partnership, OGP, is an international multi-stakeholder initiative that aims to make governments more open, accountable and responsive to citizens. It brings together 78 countries and a growing number of local governments working closely with thousands of civil society organizations. OGP's mission is closely aligned with that of the Community of Democracies to advance and protect democratic freedoms, strengthen democratic institutions, and expand public participation. Both organizations share a commitment to core democratic values. 24 member states of COD's Governing Council are also OGP members, and 7 are part of both COD's and OGP's leadership bodies. Romania has been a member of OGP since 2011 and is now at its second mandate in the steering committee. Through our 4 OGP and national action plans, we have already implemented important measures that improved civic space, transparency and participation, anti-corruption and open data. There is more to go, but we are committed to promote, support and implement open government reforms at both national and local level. We are also a proof that OGP provides an effective implementation and monitoring mechanism for reforms relevant for the common goals of both the community and the partnership. In this context, our proposal to COD is to consider the opportunity of a stronger collaboration with OGP as an active approach to achieve the objectives outlined in the Community Strategic Plan for 2018-2023. Integration of COD recommendations into the national OGP action plans of common member states could also help increase the focus and impact of the measures while creating opportunities to inspire and learn from others. Furthermore, a stronger collaboration between COD and OGP could assist the actions that aim to protect civic space during these troublesome times. Emergency measures in response to the pandemic have resulted in restricted freedom of assembly and association in order to prevent the spread of the virus, in restricted freedom of speech in order to tackle the spread of misinformation. We believe that enabling a safe civic space is even more important now in times of crisis in order citizens and ensure transparent and effective government actions. For example, OGP's Open Response and Open Recovery campaign include a set of recommendation research and case how governments can uphold principles of open government as a response to this pandemic. It is with hope and a strong commitment to core democratic values that I assure you of OGP's openness to develop and deepen the collaboration with COD. Thank you for the invitation to speak today at the Community of Democracy video conference.
And I thank the Secretary of State for his message and his initiative for an increased partnership with the community of democracies. And I now would like to invite Ambassador Shimi, the Special Envoy for Human Rights and International Peace and Stability of Japan, to speak. Ambassador.
Thank you very much. His Excellency Mr. Bogdan Aurescu, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Romania, His Excellency Mr. Thomas Garrett, Secretary General of the Community of Democracy, distinguished ministers, Excellencies. At the outset, I'd like to express deep appreciation to the government of Romania for hosting online the 20th anniversary conference of the Warsaw Declaration and the Community of Democracy, and to the Secretariat of the Community of Democracies for supporting the preparation of the conference. It is my honor to have the opportunity to deliver a statement on behalf of the government of Japan. First of all, Japan expresses its deepest sympathy with the victims of the COVID-19 pandemic. COVID-19 is causing a serious human security crisis, spreading across borders and striking the most vulnerable segment of society. In this regard, Japan has assisted vulnerable countries and communities in need affected by the virus from a mid to long-term perspective. For example, Japan has made and will make contribution to the global strategy against COVID-19 through international organizations as well as through bilateral cooperation. Japan wishes that our cooperation will bring an end to the pandemic and improve the people's lives in affected countries as soon as possible. Excellencies, for the last 20 years, Japan has consistently supported the Warsaw Declaration and the universal and core values such as freedom, democracy, basic human rights, and rule of law. Currently, the COVID-19 poses a threat to democracy. For example, it is reported that some countries introduced restrictive measures that limit freedom of expression and impede journalists from exercising their profession. Therefore, on the occasion of the 20th anniversary, Japan would like to renew our unwavering commitment to the same values. Japan believes that access to transparent, timely, reliable, and fact-based information is crucial for an effective global response to the pandemic. It constitutes the foundation of good governance and reinforces the resilience of our societies and democracies. In addition, as described in the United Nations Secretary General's report, measures adopted by government in response to the pandemic should be necessary, proportionate, and non-discriminatory, in compliance with international law and have a specific focus and duration. The pandemic should not be used as a pretext to undermine the rule of law, democracy, and human rights, including freedom of expression, freedom of press, and access to information online and offline. Excellencies, democracy cannot be achieved overnight. It is very fragile at the introductory stage or in time of crisis such as now. Japan stands ready to contribute to promotion of democracy and improvement of the human rights situation, not only in the Asian Pacific region, but around the world. Lastly, I'd like to stress that Japan will further cooperate with all of you present here today on the commemorative occasion of the 20th anniversary of the Warsaw Declaration. Thank you, sir.
I would like to thank the distinguished Special Envoy for Human Rights and International Peace and Stability of Japan for this message, and I would like to return the program to Foreign Minister Aurescu.
Well, thank you so much. Let me now invite His Excellency Mr. Stéphane Dion, Prime Minister, Special Envoy for the European Union and Europe, Canada's Ambassador to Germany and former Foreign Minister of Canada. Mr. Minister, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Chair Aurescu, Secretary General Garrett, Honorable Madame Albright, distinguished guests. At the occasion of this Communities of Democracy's 20th anniversary, we come together amid a global health crisis to confirm our desire that every government respect the democratic principles clearly announced in the Warsaw Declaration. Our responses to the pandemic must also be guided by these very principles. We recognize that emergency measures may be needed to protect public health in the face of such a pandemic. These emergency powers should be used exclusively for legitimate public health goals and applied in a non-discriminatory way. They must meet the basic test of necessity, proportionality, and transparency. They should never be co-opted for other purposes. They should never become sweeping, indefinite powers, leading to long-term degradation of democratic and human rights institutions, including privacy rights. Restrictions imposed on the freedoms of movement and peaceful assembly should not target specific groups, minorities, or individuals, and should not be used to silence opposition, human rights defenders, or journalists. Security measures to prevent the propagation of COVID-19 cannot be a justification for excessive use of force. Canada urged governments to ensure that their police and armed forces respect human rights in the implementation of emergency measures. Measures implemented to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic must be developed in consultation with opposition parties and regional governments. Parliaments, the courts, review and accountability bodies, the media, and the people themselves must be in a situation to play a role in scrutinizing the actions of government that the government takes to counter COVID-19. This is essential when one considers that the global pandemic has led to severe economic and social downturns, resulting in increased unemployment, a rise in poverty, and the erosion of health and social benefit protection. In this digital age, the COVID-19 pandemic has catalyzed an unprecedented rollout of surveillance technologies worldwide to track the spread of the virus. And this is a good thing. However, digital technology should never be used as a tool to violate human rights, including peaceful assembly, freedom of movement, and the right to be free from arbitrary and unlawful interference with privacy. Freedom of expression, including media freedom, must be protected. As Professor Larry Diamond, during his concluding remarks at the 9th Ministerial Meeting of the Community of Democracies, reminded us, tolerance for and willingness to engage differing points of view is a core element of democratic culture and should not be eroded. This is why it is important to advocate with renewed vigor for the development of a free, open, and secure internet. Its existence has become critical to promote human rights internationally and information sharing amid the pandemic. The fact is that democracy remains essential in times of crisis. Our efforts at response and recovery are strengthened when they are inclusive of the views, ideas, and innovations from all elements of society. To conclude my remarks, Canada is committed to protecting and promoting democracy at home and abroad through collaboration with other countries, civil society partners, and multilateral organizations. I welcome the continued collaboration of the community of democracies to address the ongoing challenges that we face as democracies. And Canada thanked the Romanian presidency for having convened all of us virtually here today.
Thank you, Minister, for your kind words and for a very insightful message. I would like to invite now Her Excellency Mrs. Mira Sun, Ambassador of the Republic of Korea to the Republic of Poland, to take the floor. Madam, you have the floor.
On behalf of the government of the Republic of Korea, I'd like to congratulate the 20th anniversary of the Community of Democracies and express our deepest appreciation to the government of Romania and the COD Permanent Secretariat for organizing this conference at this challenging time. For 20 years, the COD has served as a unique global platform for governments and civil society to share ideas on promoting democratic values. Here, I'd like to point, just to reminisce in that exactly 20 years ago, when COD was launched in the Parliament of Poland in Warsaw, that was right after we had the first landmark Inter-Korea Summit. So for me, this is a very special moment for not only for COD, but also for Korea in that sense. The Republic of Korea is honored and proud to support the COD as a member of the Executive Committee and the donor to its initiatives, especially to promote the objective of women and democracy. The presidents of Romania for the next 2 years will undoubtedly contribute to COD's further development and diversification, and we hereby affirm we are willing and committed to remain actively involved in the COD. Back to the main agenda today, questions have been raised about the effectiveness of democracies in the fight against COVID-19 and the potential misuse of digital technology as tools of mass surveillance. In particular, experts have identified 3 areas, namely freedom of information, freedom of movement, and free elections as major challenges to democracies during this time of pandemic. Indeed, they are the same elements our government has diligently endeavored to safeguard while fighting COVID-19, and it may be safe to say with some caution that our fight against COVID-19 has been effective and sustainable thanks to such safeguard of democratic values, not because of those values that have been weakened. To be specific, we shared with and fully disclosed to the public all information known to and all actions taken by the government about the coronavirus, while strictly complying with the protection of personal data and privacy under the law, which goes to freedom of information. We also kept society open without any draconian lockdown or closing the border, which goes to freedom of movement. We also held our national parliamentary election in mid-April as scheduled, after flattening the pandemic curve, which goes to free elections. The principles of transparency and openness helped win the public trust in the government, which then led to civic participation and in cooperation with the government guidelines and recommendations in fighting COVID-19. The government was transparent and open when problems were encountered, and the public enthusiastically responded with collective wisdom to help solve the problems. The highest voter turnout in nearly 3 decades for the parliamentary election in April is a testament to such public trust in and support for democracy. This was also possible thanks to our ICT infrastructure for 3 ITs, testing, tracing, and treating, that is quickly identifying positive cases and close contacts so that they may be quarantined and treated, and the rest of the society can move freely. In the end, technology itself is only as good or bad as how it is used. And we have certainly endeavored to use it proportionately with full accountability to the people. We have learned from failures of the recent past and become particularly keen on such point. After all, In the end, that is the whole point of the government, of any government, to serve the people and to the best to keep the public safe and secure and strong. And I'm sure everybody can agree on that point. Thank you.
Well, I thank Your Excellency for your message, and I will pass again the floor to Thomas.
Thank you, Excellency. And I would like to now invite His Excellency, Mr. Rauno Meresari, the Ambassador at Large on Human Rights and Democracy of the Republic of Finland, to speak. Ambassador.
Thank you, Secretary General, Foreign Minister, Your Excellencies, colleagues. I'm honored to address this 20th anniversary conference on behalf of my minister and the government of Finland. Let me first express our gratitude to the government of Romania for your efforts emphasizing the importance of young people in democratic processes is critical and timely at a time of major global transitions. We need young generation to promote democracy in a sustainable manner. Let me also thank Secretary General Thomas E. Garrett and his team for their leadership and strong commitment to strengthen global movement for democracy. Community of Democracy spends its 20th anniversary in exceptional circumstances and by unusual ways, virtually. Intergovernmental organizations like the Community of Democracies must be able to continue their work despite of needs for physical distancing. We need democracy now more than ever, and we need rules-based international cooperation to defend democracy and human rights. The spread of COVID-19 has led to some states, including my country, adopting emergency measures to protect public health and save lives. These measures must be necessary, time-bound, and fully in compliance with international human rights law. We are concerned that some governments have abused the use of emergency powers, undermining the rule of law and democracy. Transparent, just, and accountable governance can protect public health and well-being, and at the same time safeguard human rights, democracy, and rule of law. As the Governing Council statement says, democratic systems, strong institutional capacity, transparency, and public trust have the best basis to overcome health and other crises and to promote sustainable development. Fact-based and accessible information about the COVID-19 pandemic is essential to reducing the risk of spreading the virus, and it helps to save lives. The COVID-19 has resulted in more activities taking place online than ever before, at large in raising awareness of the pandemic, but also attempting to spread disinformation online. The aim of disinformation is to create erosion of trust in public information and democratic institutions. We shall defend open democracy also in order to protect public health and well-being. Finland is a proud member of the Community of Democracies. We are fully committed to the founding principles of the COD. According to Prime Minister Sanna Marin's government program, Finland's foreign and security policy is human rights-based. So we highlight values as democracy and rule of law. And the real test is their implementation, and we can always improve our performance. You may ask if it is not slightly naive and one-sided to start talking about human rights and democracy in a world that is undergoing major upheavals. Values are something experienced as a very soft issue in this tough world. We see, and I quote now my foreign minister, we see foreign policy based on values as a way of structuring today's large global trends by looking at the situation from the perspective of the individual and the realization of the individual's rights. And this is not a bad viewpoint in the world where various authoritarian trends which belittle the individual rights have gathered strength, and in which conflicts or lack of development keep too many people from realization of their fundamental rights. We believe that this is what the citizens, voters, and people all over the world are expecting from their political leaders. We need global movement for democracy, and that's why we need Community of Democracies, its member states, and its civil society pillar. Thank you.
I thank Ambassador Messari for his message, and I would now like to invite Professor Balinas Valdez, Director General of Human Rights and Democracy of the United Mexican States, to speak. And before he speaks, if I may offer congratulations to the United Mexican States on its recent accession to a seat in the UN Security Council. Mr. Director General, would you like to speak?
Mr. President, Excellencies, good morning from Mexico and to member states in the Americas, and good afternoon and evening to those in Bucharest, Warsaw, and other capitals across Europe, Africa, and Asia. For Mexico, it's a great honor to be part of this global coalition comprised of member states from most regions of the world that have committed by common democratic values and gathered here today to commemorate the 20th anniversary of the Community of Democracies and its founding. Mexico is deeply convinced that respect, promotion, and protection of the 19 principles and rights reflected in the Warsaw Declaration, in addition to guarantee and promote the rule of law, are necessarily conditions for democratic regimes to contribute and to foster sustainable social and economic development for people around the world. We reach the 20th anniversary of this declaration at a time in which the world finds itself in a state of deep turmoil. The coronavirus pandemic faced around the world, the globe, has presented us with a range of new challenges to democracy and human rights. Even democratic and liberal democracies have witnessed a trade-off between accept restrictions to some liberties while guaranteeing health and integrity to the people. In these darkened times, the government of Mexico strongly believes that the Warsaw Declaration provides a roadmap for inspiring and transitional democracies as well as a checklist for established ones. If we are able to make the next decade of the Community of Democracies a brighter one than the previous two, we must act with the conviction that the core democratic values of the Warsaw Declaration remain relevant and are even more important today than 20 years ago when the Declaration was adopted. Democratic institutions must then prove that they can remain in place without lasting effect after liberty restriction due to the pandemic. Most importantly, in fragmented society, it remains imperative to uphold pluralistic values and to promote respect for multiculturalism and inclusion. This will be the agenda for the next decade, as well as to avoid backlashes to libertarian regimes due to the authoritarian temptations in many regions of the world. The contents of the Warsaw Declaration gain a new relevance as it helps to promote and protect fundamental freedoms. It is time to show a renewal to establish, foster, and strengthen transparent government institutions which encourage social participation and are fully accountable to the people. In the name of the government of Mexico, thank you very much, muchas gracias, and thank you very much for the recognition of the Security Council election. Thank you very much.
And I thank the distinguished Director General of Human Rights and Democracy for his words, and I will turn the program back to Foreign Minister Aurescu.
Thank you. I would like to invite now Dr. Gustav Lind, Deputy Director General and Head of the Department for International Law, Human Rights and Treaty Law from Sweden, to take the floor.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chair, Excellencies, colleagues, since the founding of the Community of Democracies, there have been impressive development of democracy around the world. I think it's clear that the Warsaw Declaration and the founding of COD was both important and very well timed. Today, support for democracy as a fair and just system of government is strong in many parts of the world. But COD must not only be an organization for fair weather, but also for storm. And unfortunately, I think we are in somewhat of the storm. We see around the world how authoritarian leaders are gaining ground and democratic principles are under threat, and respect for the freedom of expression, assembly and association is on the decline. You can see democratic institutions are being weakened, and democratic space, not least for civil society, is shrinking. So I think the principles of the Warsaw Declaration are perhaps even more important today, both for us as members of COD, but also for the rest of the world. Mr. Chair, Sweden, we can't quietly just sit idly by and watch the surge of authoritarianism around the world. So the government has started a campaign that is called the Drive for Democracy, which is a top priority for the Swedish government foreign policy, where we try to work with countries, multilateral organizations, civil society to highlight the role of democracy in equality, participation, sustainable development, including growth, governance, human rights and security. So rather broad work from us. Action to promote and strengthen the role of political parties, civil society and media freedom is obviously crucial in this regard. And 1/4 of the Swedish development aid supports democracy and human rights. And since we still have 1% of gross national income, that is quite a lot. We can see with the COVID-19 pandemic, these efforts have been even more important now, and has been mentioned by many, the crisis should not be used as an excuse to impose undue restrictions on democracy and human rights. And one important challenge will be to monitor that decisions that restrict human rights are rolled back when the pandemic is over. So we need to be vigilant regarding possible lasting effects, and standards must not be altered. I think this is an important task for COD. I think it's an important task for all of us as members of COD. So I'd like to conclude just to thank the Romanian chairmanship and the COD Secretariat for arranging this video conference, which has been a fantastic discussion between all of us. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Lind, for your message. We hope the storm will be over at some point. And now I have the pleasure to invite Mr. Ricardo Luis Bocalandro, Director of the International Organizations Department of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Argentina, to take the floor.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, and I appreciate your convening this meeting. 20 years after Argentina restates its commitment to the Community of Democracies, under the Warsaw Declaration, my country holds an international forum. The promotion and strengthening of the fundamental principles of democracy as universal values. Argentina has gone through a peaceful and ordered government transition last December, at a time in which many nations face uncertainties regarding the democratic institutions. My country can reaffirm the quality and strength of its democratic system. Democracy is a multidimensional political exercise expressed through rights and actions that the state guarantees to the people and that the people demands to its state through constitutional mechanisms of popular participation and accountability. The organization of regular, free and fair election is obviously at the core of any democratic political system, based on giving the people the right to choose their leaders. But a genuine democratic system is more than a pluralistic democracy. It must ensure popular participation in government's activities and citizens' rights. Human rights, non-discrimination, separation of powers, rule of law, freedom of speech and the enjoyment of economic and social rights are key elements for a solid democracy. But many times it is hindered by underdevelopment and extreme poverty. Hence, the implementation of the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda favoring a human rights approach and the protection of the most humble and disadvantaged are also fundamental instruments for democracy. In this context of global pandemic, all governments must reassure the democratic principles and the rule of law, ensuring that measures implemented are those necessary for the protection of public health, proportionate to the public health risk, non-discriminatory, gender-based, limited on time, and in respect of human rights. At facing the virus, both Argentine people and government have responded with an integral approach, setting the protection of life as the main priority. We are guided by the ethics of care and solidarity, looking after family health and physical integrity. Our resources are committed at the healthcare system and its facilities, as well as at fostering research. Such is the case of the Argentinian fast test kit. We have also focused on mitigating the economic consequences of the pandemic through public policies. The state helps companies to pay salaries and to access low-rate loans, provides direct assistance to the most vulnerable, and cooperates with NGOs. We assure access to education through virtual and digital platforms and secure access to all public services. Our institutions have proved to be strong and flexible, promoting democratic dialogue while also supporting institutionality through technology. All rights and principles included in the Government Council statement are fully valid and enforced in my country. In the battle against COVID-19, mankind's fate is even more interconnected. As our President has stated, taking the words of His Holiness Pope Francis, no one can save on their own alone. This unprecedented crisis demands unity and collective responsibility. Both governments and citizens must get involved. It is necessary to support multilateralism and the international instruments in strict compliance of international law and human rights, as well as to guarantee the involvement of civil society. This crisis opens the door to come out stronger by forging a greater international solidarity pact and to building a fairer and better prepared world. I thank you very much for your time and your patience.
Thank you so much, Mr. Director, for your words. And I would like to pass the mic again to the Secretary General.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. I would now like to invite Mr. Oscar Gabriel Pinheiro Bentos, Directorate of Multilateral Affairs at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in the Oriental Republic of Uruguay, to speak.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary General, Your Excellencies. On behalf of the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Uruguay, Dr. Ernesto Talvi, the delegation of Uruguay greets all the delegations participating in this celebration of the 20th anniversary of the Warsaw Declaration toward a community of democracies. We are very pleased to celebrate with you all these 20 years of shared work in the community of democracies. We appreciate the work done organizing these events by the Romanian presidency, in the person of the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Bogdan Aurescu, as well as by the Secretary General of the Community of Democracies, Thomas E. Garrett, and the Permanent Secretariat. And we would also like to express our congratulations. Unfortunately, we are celebrating this 20th anniversary at a time in which many lives have been lost in the war, and many people's health has been affected due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Many others have suffered its impacts on their ways and means of life. Particular consideration is required by those who are most exposed or most susceptible to suffering the consequences of this pandemic in a great manner. Special attention among these should be given to the most vulnerable citizens. The consequences of this pandemic have reached politics, society, and the economy. Facing these facts, the states must act in accordance with the highest democratic standards and give effective and accountable responses framed in the warranties that the Constitution and the law provide to citizens, also ensuring full respect for human rights. In such a situation as the current one, we understand it necessary to highlight the importance of multilateralism, as well as the need to improve international cooperation and solidarity. International cooperation is key to enable developments and eradicate poverty. But nowadays, it is also clearly evident that in the face of ever-changing challenges, it is also important to keep the necessary conditions and supports in order to make it possible to go ahead in sustainable development. Cooperation between our states should be contemplated in our work at the level of the recognition of international cooperation as an essential factor which contributes to the preservation of the democratic development and well-being of our peoples. Within this framework, it stands out, among other areas, the advisability of international cooperation in science and technology, today more necessary than ever. We trust that the challenges we face today on this 20th anniversary of the Warsaw Declaration to be the trigger to promote by the member states of the Community of Democracies joint efforts towards a democratic, sustainable, participative and inclusive development. Thanks very much.
And I thank Mr. Pinheiro Ventos for his message. And now I would like to invite Ms. Paulina Ibar, chair of the International Steering Committee of the Civil Society Pillar, to speak.
Good morning, Your Excellencies, dear colleagues and friends. I am truly honored to have the opportunity to address this gathering of democracy practitioners and advocates from around the world in my capacity as the elected chair of the International Steering Committee of the Community of Democracies. The ISC members and other activists that together comprise the civil society pillar are enormously proud of the role they have played in the Community of Democracies since its inception. Let me also say how thrilled I am to join with former U.S. Secretary of State Madeleine Albright, the mother of the Community of Democracies, and Morton Halperin, the father of the CD, the visionaries behind the historic initiative. And I would like to take this opportunity to personally thank Morton for his support when I assumed his position as the chair of the ISC and for his constant and valuable counsel. The world was a very different place in June 2000. The prevailing view was not that democracy is easy to establish and sustain, but that it had clearly demonstrated its ability to simultaneously fulfill the human yearning for freedom and the requirement for broad socioeconomic progress and prosperity better than any other system for organizing society. Highly repressive governments have that consistently deprive their citizens of their most fundamental freedoms and show little concern for acute poverty had not gone away, but were coming under intensive pressure to move toward democratic government. 2 decades later, we are confronting the reality of democracy under threat from resurgent authoritarian regimes that deprive their citizens of their fundamental freedoms, while many other countries that had initially embraced democratic systems, norms, and practices are backsliding toward despotic rule. We cannot continue letting this form of pandemic take democracy over. Because of that, the need for a community of democracies has never been greater. Notwithstanding the daunting challenges we are confronting, let us not underestimate the resilience of democratic institutions and the extraordinary courage of those seeking to preserve and strengthen them. While democracy is far from flourishing everywhere, there should be no doubt that in every patch of earth across this world, there are brave and committed people who will not rest until they too can live and thrive in a truly democratic society. Countries around the world have, of course, been severely impacted by the global COVID-19 pandemic. In addition to the direct loss of life and burden of sickness, we are suffering under a severe economic crisis due to the combination of domestic lockdowns and collapsing international trade. Anti-democratic forces have not only taken advantage of this crisis to grab more power for themselves, they have also asserted that authoritarian regimes and strong leaders are better and protected public health than democracies. This dangerous assertion threatens the hard-work gains of the past decades. In the midst of this crisis, we have seen some leaders and groups leverage fear and uncertainty as a means of further entrenching discrimination and violence against marginalized groups, including women, ethnic and religious minorities, migrants and refugees. Additionally, we have witnessed attacks on free media, police brutality, decreased transparency and citizen oversight, government abuse of emergency powers, and the promulgation of fake news. This crisis has particularly impactful to civil society and is severely impeding our ability to continue operations through many of our usual channels in light of quarantine and social distancing guidelines. However, it is precisely during these difficult times that the work of the community of democracies, and in particularly the work of the civil society pillar, is most vital. In the face of these challenges, now more than ever, we, the community of democracies, must stand together and support one another as we work to defend and uphold the principles enshrined in the Warsaw Declaration, the same principles that we collectively pledged to uphold 20 years ago. We must be unwavering in our commitment to uphold human rights, including civil, cultural, economic, political, and social rights, and protect citizens' rights to privacy. We must be firm in our support of independent media, freedom of expression, freedom of the press, and the cultivation of an informed citizenry. We must be steadfast in our resolve to promote transparency, protect the freedom of public information, and hold governments accountable, ensuring that they operate within all constitutional and legal limits. I call on all members of the Governing Council to reach out and work with your civil society pillar focal points to support the ability of civil society to continue working to defend human rights and the integrity of democratic processes during this time. Despite the challenges we now face, our collective force is uniquely positioned to defend and support civil society, engage in local initiatives of solidarity and support, and inform the actions of our respective government counterparts while working to hold them accountable to the citizens they serve. Let us, whether we're serving in government or part of the civil society, use the 20th anniversary of the Community of Democracies to spark a new, deeper commitment to uphold and bolster the enduring principles of the Warsaw Declaration and to rededicate ourselves to strengthening democratic institutions and practices where they exist, while standing with courageous activists and advocates who contest tyranny through non-violence means. There is no more consequential or noble undertaking in the contemporary world. Thank you for your time.
And I want to thank Ms. Ibarra for bringing the very important voice, the very vital voice of civil society to today's event. And I would now turn the program back to the Foreign Minister.
Yes, thank you so much. And since Mrs. Ibarra mentioned the important role of the focal points, I have the pleasure to invite now Mr. Sorin Ionica, President of the Expert Forum, who is the International Steering Committee focal point for Romania. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Minister. I want to thank you, the Romanian Presidency, for involving the civil society in this exercise and in the preparation of this event, and also the Secretariat for the preparation work. Sadly, as it was remarked before, we are reduced to a video conference, but if we were able to meet in person, we would have discussed probably first the progress of democracy, because we have to admit it and to see also the bright side of the story of the last 20 years. There's progress and there's resilience, but we would have also probably discussed the threats to democracy, the backsliding on norms, and the backdoor authoritarianism that we see around us, even sadly in some EU member countries. There are hybrid regimes, as politologists call them, increasingly sophisticated in maintaining the appearance of democracy, maintaining the institutions, maintaining the rules, the things that we usually as think tank analysts measure, but undermining in a very subtle way the political competition and creating an unfair playing ground. And this is probably the main threat that we are facing today globally when we speak about democracy. There's also destabilization from abroad in many countries, and we have to face this risk either from non-democratic states, so the destabilization is coming from there, or by non-state actors. And this is also a risk, and these countries that are facing this must be helped. Before the COVID crisis, where we are in the middle of a dispute on global public goods, and I refer here to the climate change agenda, and these things are not very easy to solve and to negotiate, but unfortunately the COVID crisis added a new layer of complications. And of course, as it was remarked, we face this continuous problem of disinformation and fake news, and even more than that, the use of artificial intelligence to control populations. So we have more and more means and tools, some of them created by undemocratic regimes, and some are used to manipulate politics and political campaigns. And this is also concerning, especially in fledgling democracies. There used to be a shrinking space for civil society and the media in some countries, and the virus crisis didn't do any good to that, because in many countries it was used as a pretext actually to clamp down further on especially on independent journalists and on civil society. So in brief, the COVID crisis magnified the dangers and created a sense of urgency in intervention that sometimes suits so to speak, politicians with authoritarian inclinations. But the bright side of the story is that it made us more aware, this latest crisis, but also the backsliding in the last 20 years, of the value of democracy, of the fragility of democracy, and of the fact that we need a proactive agenda to support democratic institutions. They don't just hold by themselves. They don't, fall from the sky. There is a cost to create democracies and to maintain them. And we are probably today more aware of that than we were even 20 years ago. So to conclude, I think, and I pledge with the member states of the COD to create more instruments, to empower the Secretariat to improve the monitoring and the evaluation of the democracies in light of these new dangers and of the subtle undermining of democratic norms that we've seen lately. Because, as they say in management, what is not measured is usually not addressed and fixed. We need new instruments, and in the brief report that I authored for the Secretariat General, I propose that we could reflect on a democracy resilience index customized for various regions of the world that would make us more aware and will inform the conversation on the democratic resilience and on what we should do to reinforce democratic institutions. And thank you very much, the Romanian Presidency and the Secretariat, for the whole organization of the event.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. President. I cannot but agree with what you just said. And I would like to to remind you all that, well, the Community of Democracy is not alone. There are also other organizations which are having in mind this subtle undermining of democracy through formal existing institutions and legal frameworks. I would only mention a report which was adopted last year by the Venice Commission of the Council of Europe, which is also called with its full title the European Commission for Democracy Through Law, so very much connected to the promotion of democracy through legal instruments, a report which is about the relationship between majority and opposition in a democracy, which is in fact discussing about this subtle ways of undermining democracy and the tools which we have in order to counter such situations in a democratic society, and especially within the framework of the existing instruments and mechanisms within a parliament. Thank you so much for your words. And now I have the pleasure to introduce the last speaker on our list, His Excellency Mr. Luis Almagro, Secretary General of the Organization of American States, to take the floor. Sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the Presidency. Thank you to the General Secretariat. Very kind. Friends, Minister, Secretary General, it is an honor to join you today in celebration of the 20th anniversary of the Warsaw Declaration. Secretary General Garrett, as always, it's a pleasure to collaborate with you and the team at the Community of Democracies. I am proud to say that the OES was present when the Warsaw Declaration was adopted in 2000, founding of the Community of Democracy. For these 20 years since, we have stood together on this journey in our democratic history. Our two organizations are united in our belief that democracy and democratic governance must be adhered at all levels of society and in the most inclusive manner, and it is these shared values upon which our joint Memorandum of Understanding is based. Working together, our organization is strengthening our efforts to uphold these values and support resiliency of the legal and political instruments that uphold our free societies. As we are all well aware, we are convened in this online forum under the shadow of the COVID-19 pandemic. It's a stark reminder that many of the challenges facing the world today are not confined by borders, but require an international response. How quickly our lives have changed only exemplifies why institutions such as the OES and the Community of Democracies are a realization of the essential role multilateralism plays in our modern globalized world. As an institution, the OES has been forced to adapt quickly to a new way of operating, ensuring the safety of our team while making sure the vital work of the organization continues. For the Americas, we have been able to adapt and leverage our platforms for greater coordination and information sharing among member states in order to share best practices and models for a successful regional response to the crisis. We have developed some innovative tools to support our member states in reinforcing their democratic commitments during this crisis, including the practical guide to inclusive rights-focused response to COVID-19, which focuses on protection for vulnerable groups, the report by the Inter-American Commission on Women, COVID-19 in Women's Lives, reason to recognize the differential impacts, which looks at the differential impact this crisis has had on women and girls, as well as the political action guide to address the COVID-19 pandemic under democratic principles, which provides guidance on the role of the state in serving as protagonist in the democratic process while confronting the pandemic. These tools are publicly available, and I have also asked that links to these documents be shared and with all of you participating today with the hope that they can be applied in your own countries, circumstances and cultural contents. COVID-19 presents a new kind of challenge to our democracies. This is not simply a health crisis, but it has quickly become a crisis for our economic and political systems as well, one that as a global community we did not foresee the scale nor were prepared for its full impact. Even countries with the strongest institutions and most vibrant of democratic cultures are being tested. It should be no surprise that other states at different stages in their democratic consolidation have been shaken to their very core. These new pressures only compound the challenges for countries already struggling with weak governance and limited capacities to deliver social services. With the hemisphere becoming the current global epicenter of the pandemic, the vulnerabilities of our social, economic and institutions have been exposed. The efficiency of administrations is being judged more immediately because they are required to respond immediately to a crisis for which no one was equipped. The reality is that around the world, the response to the crisis has required varying degrees of limits on the rights and freedom of our citizens. It has become a shared burden as citizens too, carrying the responsibility of containment and limiting the spread of the virus. As states choosing their tools of response, it has proven an increasing challenge to draw the line between a flawed or inadequate response or lack of capacity, as opposed to an abuse of power rooted in a liberal intent. The pandemic cannot distract us or let us turn a blind eye to dictatorship and atrocity. Those with a liberal intent are using the crisis as just the latest excuse rationalizing their repressive practice and rampant abuse. But there is no question that unprecedented humanitarian crisis in Venezuela as well underway long before we have heard of COVID-19. More than 5 million of citizens already forced to flee with a still untold cost in lives within its own borders. Singularly caused by the crank corruption and gross mismanagement of a regime of elites only concerned with personal power and wealth. It is a similar greed that has led to the mass human rights violations and dismantling of democracy in Nicaragua, both emulating the Cuban model of authoritarianism and trying to hide their latest bad practices behind the pandemic. It is unequivocal. We cannot allow or condone this crisis being used as an excuse of encroaching authoritarian practices and the consolidation of power. At the same time, we also must be careful not to create dictatorships where they are not. Our political systems have been affected, elections have been postponed, and some have been forced to rethink the exercise of certain rights that we have always considered fundamental in our societies. Rights such as the freedom movement, freedom of assembly, freedom of association. We have been forced to reconsider the spirit of these rights in the context of ensuring the public order necessary to preserve life. We must deliberate in the distinction between what is necessary now and how these considerations will affect our fundamental rights tomorrow. The true test of our systems will lie in restoring the civil liberties and freedoms at the heart of our democracies. To this end, the OAS is focused on reinforcing our 4 key pillars of democracy, human rights, security and development, to ensure that our states emerge from this pandemic on a steady footing and that the full scope of freedoms and human rights which our democracies were designed to guarantee are restored. The way in which we address structural challenges such as poverty, inequality, the challenges in public order, political stability, institutional strength and independence between powers is more relevant than ever. The OAS was the first international organization to establish the defense and promotion of democracy as one of its fundamental purposes. We are honored to have such important allies as those around this virtual table in the cause of protecting and promoting democracy, ensuring that our democracies come off this crisis on a solid footing. Thank you very much.
I thank you so much, Mr. Secretary General, for your intervention. We do support we do appreciate the support of the regional organizations in joining the efforts for multilateralism and for the advancement of democracy. I very much agree with you that we should not create dictatorships where they do not exist. We should not create dictatorships at all. And I think this is our concern of the community of democracies to fight authoritarianism and to promote democracy in all circumstances. Since there is no other speaker on our list, I would like to move to the closing remarks of our conference. And I would like to thank you all for taking part in this high-level meeting. It was an honor for me to host this meeting and to co-chair it together with the Secretary General of the Community of Democracies, because this meeting reassessed the status of our mutually shared democratic values, an exercise which is highly needed, especially during these times of crisis, as almost everybody who has spoken emphasized. But also this meeting, I think it's important because at this 20th anniversary we had the chance to reaffirm and reconfirm our strong commitment to these values through our renewed support for the Warsaw Principles, for our renewed effort to maintain democracy worldwide. And that's why I think the document that we have adopted, the Bucharest Statement, which we have endorsed today, is an important document completing and complementing at the same time the Warsaw Declaration of 2000. We should stay strong in our commitments. We should always remember that democracy is work in progress for which all efforts are priceless. And I hope to meet you and all the other participants, and perhaps not only them, but also many others, to the Community of Democracies next year in Bucharest, when we will organize, hopefully in a physical format, the 10th Ministerial Conference. I would like again to thank you all, and I would like to express my warmest thanks to the Secretariat, to Thomas and his team. They have provided, and you, Thomas, provided an invaluable support for the smooth organization of this conference. And now I would like to invite you to close this conference by saying a few words. Thank you, Thomas, once again.
Thank you, Foreign Minister. And let me just express my gratitude to Romania for its leadership as presidency of the Community of Democracies for 2019 to 2021. And I want to thank you especially, Foreign Minister Aurescu, for your gracious hosting of today's event. Let me also commend to you and to everyone listening the very talented team at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Romania. We've enjoyed working with our colleagues there and appreciate the very dedicated work they've given to this event. To those member states of the Governing Council of the Community of Democracies, let me just say that as we move together into the next 20 years of support of democracy to another, on behalf of the dedicated staff that works here at the Permanent Secretariat of the Community of Democracies, our 20th anniversary wish to you is that you stay safe and that you stay united. So thank you very much and happy anniversary. Thank you.
June 27, 2020 marks the 20th anniversary of the Community of Democracies and its founding document, the Warsaw Declaration. The Warsaw Declaration outlines 19 core principles for the effective establishment of democracy. Here is what we stand for: free and fair elections, equal access to public service, equal protection of the law, freedom of opinion and of expression, freedom of thought, conscience, and religion, equal access to education, the right of the press to collect, report, and disseminate information, news, and opinions, respect for private family life, freedom of peaceful assembly and association, the right of persons belonging to minorities or disadvantaged groups to equal protection of...
Please note, the meeting is no longer being recorded.
Attention. Competent, independent, and impartial judiciary. Elected leaders uphold the law. The right of those duly elected to form a government. The obligation of an elected government to refrain from extra-constitutional actions. that government institutions be transparent, participatory, and fully accountable. That the legislator be duly elected and transparent and accountable to the people. Democratic control over the military. That all human rights, civil, cultural, economic, political, and social be promoted and protected. Community of democracies, stay safe, stay united. Happy anniversary.